Welcome to Networking RX, a podcast devoted to helping business professionals like you enhance your networking skills in order to become more proficient giving and receiving quality business referrals and improving the overall quality of your life and the lives of those around you. The Networking RX podcast is a production of AmSpirit Business Connections, an organization whose mission is to empower business success through networking.
Welcome to the Networking RX podcast. I'm your host, Frank Agin, founder and president of AmSpirit Business Connections. Today I want to reflect on something I wrote. I wrote it and then I said it with one of my RX minutes. And it's yet to come out. It's episode 894, which will be out in a couple months. We get way ahead of ourselves with respect to the minute podcast. But it was something that social architect Terry Bean is somebody I've known for 25 years now. We were in what is now AmSpirit Business Connections years ago. Before I was just a member. We were in a chapter together, and he was a salesperson, telecommunications, wiring salesperson here in Columbus, Ohio, and then moved back to the Detroit area where he was originally from. And he's done some great things in Detroit. He's kind of been the energy behind TEDx Detroit. He put together a whole program there called, I think it's 414 Connect, whatever the area code is up there. Done a lot of Motor City Connect he's done, was another thing that comes to mind. He's just done a lot of really neat things. I call him a social architect. But he really does a lot in the networking professional relationship space, and he's one of these people that is really sought after. In fact, an insurance company now has retained his services full time, and he's helping that company move itself forward. At any rate, he wrote a book, and it's called Be Connected: Strategies to Attract the Right Opportunities, Connections, and Clients Through Effective Networking. And I have been quoting, I've read the book, and I've been quoting from it with the RX Minutes, and there have been a number of times I've quoted him. But there was one particular quote that really came to mind recently, not only just because I did an RX Minute on it, and again, that'll be coming out in a few months. It's episode 894. But it's come to mind because people have said things to me recently, or have had conversations recently, where it's really kind of made me think about this particular section that he wrote. But anyhow, his quote in the book is, "You've no doubt been taught and believe the idea that you never get a second chance to make a first impression. While technically true, I don't believe it matters." Then he goes on to talk about this particular point. He shares, "How often have you met someone who you thought was great and were proven wrong? How often have you met someone you couldn't stand at first and now like?" And that's an interesting insight. I mean, he's right. Technically, you only have one chance to make a first impression, right? You only have one chance. You only have one chance to have your first kiss, so on and so forth. That's absolutely right. But he's also right. It really doesn't matter. I mean, it can matter. It certainly can matter in the job world, where your resume comes across someone's desk and there's a glaring typo in it that is the reason that you don't get to the next step. That's your first impression. Or maybe there's something wonderful about that first impression that kind of gets you to the next step. So I get it. First impressions are important. And I don't think Terry is saying they're not important. He's just saying, it doesn't matter long term in the world of relationships. And to a degree, he's right. The point he goes on to make here, and I want to kind of expand on kind of a different take on it, but the point he goes on to make in this section of the book is that because we're so prone to make that good first impression, sometimes we hurry to impress or over-impress. We talk about ourselves, do this, do this, do this. And I think if we're all honest with ourselves, we can think of moments where we're probably a little bit insecure and we just feel like we need to just be kind of piling on with different things that we've done and making ourselves look great. tend not to do that when we feel like we have the upper hand, but in a situation, maybe we're in a job interview, or maybe we're meeting that great key client, whatever it might be, or potential client, we're tending to have diarrhea of the mouth, if you will, just go on and on and on. And what we tend to lose in that situation is we tend to lose the opportunity to really learn about the other person. And what he goes on in the book is basically invite them to go first. Invite them to talk about themselves first. And again, very, very insightful. It kind of takes us away from talking about ourselves and over impressing. Because we just keep rolling and rolling with stuff and talking about ourselves. And we did this, and we did this, and we did this, and that can be off-putting. But that was the point he wanted to make. But what I really want to talk about is I want to talk about the notion of subsequent impressions. And that so often we go to try and make that first impression, and we are wrong. Or I shouldn't say we're wrong. We make that first impression, and it's the subsequent ones that really matter. Because that's the whole nature of a relationship, is a relationship isn't geared on that first impression. A relationship is geared on over time. You're kind of measured. I don't want to say you're measured point to point, but you're kind of building up a bank of things that are happening, and people measure that. Maybe it's an average, however you want to analogize it. But there are times where you're running into people and you think, okay, wow, this person's great. What a great first meeting. I'm so impressed. And then it kind of goes downhill from there. And I can think of lots of people who are like that, especially in the networking space, people who write on relationships and business networking. There are some real genuine people out there. I'll say this time and again, and if you know him, you can say I said it. I'm not going to tag him in this. Bob Berg, he walks his talk. His book, The Go-Giver, is great, and that is Bob Berg. Everything that's in that book is Bob Berg. He's just a gracious individual with his time. Everybody I talk to says that same thing. That was my experience, so I know it wasn't one-off. But there are other people who kind of play in that same space, who kind of teach people about relationships that I've encountered, and I won't get into names, but it's been anything but. It's been horribly disappointing. When I am introduced to these people, usually by a third party, I'm excited because it's like, wow, great. I try to be like Bob Berg. I try to be that go-giver. And I know I'm not perfect, but I try to emulate that. I try to live up to that. And so when I meet other people I think are like that, because it's a great asset to have those people in your life, I'm excited and then disappointed when it really kind of falls apart. And when I mean falls apart, that probably conflates what I mean. It's just you talk with them and it's all about them, and they really don't have any interest in you. And they might come on your podcast, but they're not going to promote it beyond, they're not going to promote it. That's your job. I've been here. I've done my job. You promote it, and you might not hear from them at all. And then there are people that you stumble across, and I can think of a number of people as of late that I've come across where it's been, okay, why am I talking to this person? I've been introduced to them by somebody I really respect, and so I'm going to have the call. But when I look at their LinkedIn profile, and don't judge a book by a cover, and I try not to. But when you look at it, it's like, okay, wait a minute. Why am I having this call? Am I looking at the right profile? Because it doesn't connect with what I've been told. I'm expecting somebody who's like really well connected, who really, really loves networking. And a couple people have come to mind. Two people I've interviewed released interviews on in the last couple weeks, actually. Last Thursday released a interview with Paula Scovier, and I talked about that on the interview. I told Paula, I said, when I was first introduced to to her by Scott Mason. I was obviously going to take it. Well, maybe not obviously, but Scott's just somebody who I think is the cat's meow. He's just a neat guy. And I interviewed Scott months ago, maybe a year ago now, and I've never been let down by anybody Scott's introduced me to. But when I was introduced to Paula, and she's the business development manager for Advanaclean of the east side of the Twin Cities, Minneapolis, St. Paul, Minnesota, for those who are not familiar. I'm like, okay, wait, she works for a company that does mold remediation and fire cleanup and flood cleanup. I don't get it. I don't get it. And when I got on the phone with Paula, I was just totally blown away, because while she doesn't do the things that the traditional relationship person might do. She lives that life. She gets networking. She understands about just helping other people and just adding value to the world and trusting that it'll come back. And knock wood, she feels the same way about me, and we have a long relationship. But initially, I'm looking at this, and my first impression, looking at the LinkedIn page, it's like, okay, I don't get it. But it turned into certainly it's turning into a wonderful relationship. I've released her interview, have known her for a few months and done other things with her. Other person comes to mind is a gentleman out of Chicago, Jeff Lord, and he's another one. When I was first introduced to him and looked at his profile, and maybe the lesson is, don't judge people by their LinkedIn profile. But he's kind of this technical guy, this IT guy, and it's like, all right, and maybe this is just my own prejudice. IT guys kind of geeky, but he's just another person that's just wonderfully connected, and not just wonderfully connected, but wonderfully generous with his time and connecting me to other people, and hopefully feels the same about me, and we continue on and have a good long-term relationship of helping one another in our respective spaces, if you will. But the point is that we can only, with respect to Jeff and with respect to Paula, they both represent industries that that are what they are. I mean, IT is what it is. And Jeff, I believe, might be moving from IT. He's like Terry Bean. He's just well connected, and he can fit what he does into lots of different places. And I have no doubt Paula's the same way. That if Paula decided, Advanaclean's not for me, or somebody says, hey, we love your skill set, we would like to take your skill set, she will fit in perfectly. She would fit in totally perfectly with a real estate company or a mortgage brokerage, not necessarily doing mortgages, but kind of being that business development person that's out there trying to get their name out. But so they have to, being with Advanaclean for Paula, for example, her profile needs to kind of project Advanaclean. And the fact that she's just this wonderful connector of people underneath it all is something that doesn't necessarily come through on a LinkedIn profile. And maybe it shouldn't. But the point to this conversation is that, yeah, that first impression is important. It is important to make that good first impression, but it's the subsequent impressions that really matter long term. They're vital, because you can put your best foot forward for that first contact, but that's not going to carry the day long term. It's what the second and the third and the fourth and so on and so forth, just continuing on and on and on. Those are the conversations, those are the interactions that make the most, are of the most importance. And as Terry alludes to in his book, Be Connected, in that particular passage, we do run into people who make that first great impression. And I think it's easy to, in this world, to, in a 20-minute conversation, to really kind of put your best foot forward. It's easy to, but keeping it at that level is difficult. I mean, if you can be a nice guy for 20 minutes, but if you're a jerk, it's going to come out eventually. You can be a good person for 20 minutes in that moment, be at an event and talking to somebody. But if you're unreliable, in time, that's going to come out. I recently interviewed Jim Shulman, which that came out on December 9th. And Jim was interesting because he talked about when he connects with people, he wants an hour of their time. And I think that's interesting. If somebody wants to just, talk for a half hour, that's fine. But if somebody says, hey, listen, let's connect for 15 minutes, he's kind of tipped off that, it's really kind of a sales thing. And, unless you really want to get acquainted, it's going to, I want some time. I want to learn about you. I want to hear what you're about. And I think that's an interesting approach. I'm releasing an interview tomorrow with Jill Lublin, and Jill has a different approach. I'm not saying one is right and one is wrong. They're just different approach. Her approach is, my first call is going to be 15, 20 minutes, and from there I'll determine if there'll be a second call. But I'm not going to waste an hour on something or 45 minutes on something, knowing that it may or may not be a good fit. And I think they're both good approaches, and they're both very successful, so who am I to argue? And for me, it kind of depends. But you listen for things, and you kind of make a judgment on, it's easy to make a judgment on that first impression. But we have to remember that relationships are meant to last a long time. You invest in them. You want that payback to happen over and over and over again. So don't just judge it on that first impression, and don't get wrapped up yourself on that first impression. Just be yourself. You have a chance to remedy any shortfalls, or kind of keep up, that good first impression as well. So, just something to think about as you're out there talking to people. Some people are, I'm amazed by people. I try to be amazed by people, but I'm also guarded in knowing that this may not continue. I've talked to some great people, and then they've never given me the time of day since. And I've talked to some people where it felt rocky at first, and turned into some great relationships. And just have to kind of keep an open mind about things. Just to wrap up, remind you, we are looking for people to get involved with AmSpirit Business Connections. We have a franchise opportunity. We have an opportunity just to help lead chapters. If you're so inclined, help us start a chapter and lead a chapter or two. And we obviously just have membership opportunities, have people out there that we're just helping them build groups. And we can get other directors involved, other franchisees involved to try and help with that effort. If you're interested, reach out to me using the email in the show notes, or the one we provide at the end of the podcast. Have a great day.
Thanks for joining us on the Networking RX podcast. Please put what you've learned into action today, and let us know if you have questions, comments, or ideas for future topics. You can email them to us at podcast@amspirit.com. That's AMSPIRIT.com. Finally, so you never miss an episode, be sure to subscribe to the Networking RX podcast through iTunes, Overcast, or however you receive your podcasts. Now get out and network with someone.
The Networking RX podcast is the copyright production of AmSpirit Business Connection. All rights reserved.